Welcome, fans of the Justice League universe. My name is Sam.
My name is Sydney.
And we are two members of the JLU podcast team who enjoy analyzing the DC films released by Warner Brothers Studios. Other contributors to this analysis are Alessandro Maniscalco and Rebecca Johnson.
You can find us all on Twitter, and you can follow the show at JLU Podcast.
In this episode, we're going to discuss scene 35 of Wonder Woman, directed by Patty Jenkins. This is the scene where Diana and Steve share a dance together and then retire for the night. So we call this one amongst our team, we call it the magical night scene.
That's lovely.
First of all, let's start with the overall kind of overall picture of the scene, what it contributes to the movie as a whole, or like the kind of the bigger ideas to take from it. I mean, one of the things is just very functional in terms of pacing. We had the intensity of No Man's Land, we had the action of saving Veld, then we had the kind of euphoria of having saved Veld, and now we get the sort of like, all right, let's kind of relax, let's take it down a little bit, catch our breath, and then we start to head into the next, big set piece, which will be the gala. So it's, it's a little bit of just pacing, which I think this movie had very effective pacing from start to finish.
Yeah, it's good to have some calm moments like this, and we really get to see like the charm of these characters. So, we know that they're all a bunch of badasses, but we get to see some other parts of their personality as well.
Yeah, and the chemistry between them, so we saw it on Themyscira, and then the boat ride in London for sure, and now, we haven't seen them having that kind of chemistry because they've been dealing with the trenches and the action and stuff. So now we get to go back to that personal chemistry. And that really goes to what this scene contributes in a big way, which is it contributes a part of the love story. This is an important moment in the love story, obviously, but that love story has been building from the start. And we've mentioned it a lot in our analysis about how the characters, they have reasons to connect with one another. They're learning things about each other. They're getting inspired by one another. They're pushing each other. So it's really been building up, and then this is an important moment in that love story. But it's also just, Wonder Woman is a superhero film that made a love story a central part of the film. Mm-hmm. And some superhero films don't really have a love story at all, and that's fine. Some of them kind of try to throw in a love story, but they don't really develop it in a very nuanced way or a very full way.
Right.
Some superhero films or like sequels will just like totally throw away a love story that had been developing, and then it's just like, oh, in one line, they're like, well, that's done. Forget about the love story part.
Not naming names.
That's happened in actually more than one, superhero movie.
Yeah.
But here, Patty Jenkins said from the start, this is going to have a love story in it. And it's still a superhero movie, and it doesn't take away from the action to the fact that you also have some romance happening.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's not just a subplot. I think most of the time in superhero films or, really kind of action movies in general, yeah, the romance subplot is just, it almost seems like something they add in just because they feel like they have to. So, the hero's got a girlfriend or something. Mm-hmm. It's not that important, but it's just so you can have a kiss scene or a sex scene or something arbitrarily. Mm-hmm. But here, yeah, it's a major part of it. I think that Patty Jenkins mentioned that Casablanca was a major inspiration, how it's, there's a heavy focus on the plot, but there's also a heavy focus on the relationships.
Yeah. So let's go through the scene a bit in detail, and we'll see how that love story kind of builds here and what the kind of important connections are that happen. So we start with a wide shot. We can tell it's nighttime now. They're still celebrating, the town being, saved. We have Diana and Steve sitting together on like a fountain in the middle of town, and Samir is coming up and bringing them some drinks. And it's funny because he brings back their kind of like linguistic wordplay where he kind of has a French interaction with Diana. So that's kind of a fun little callback. It's showing that they have this rapport between Diana and Samir as well. And then later it'll be Diana and Steve. But here we get a little bit of that banter between Samir and Diana too.
Yeah, it's a cute callback, and he leaves with this little "et voilà," which I kind of noticed seems to be his catchphrase. He says it a lot.
Oh yeah. And then they're gonna raise a glass and like clink glasses, and Diana might not really know this tradition. They might not clink glasses in the same kind of way on Themyscira. So we're also getting back to a little bit of that culture shock, or Diana learning the ways of man's world and stuff like that. And we'll have that more with the dancing too.
Mm-hmm. I don't think she drank that drink, did she?
I never saw her drink it. Yeah, I'll have to keep an eye out for that again. But yeah, it's fun to see Samir, and this scene functionally is really going to be a scene for Steve and Diana, but they find a way to get a little Samir in here, and then they'll find a way to get a little bit of Charlie in here as well to keep the full group active somewhat. But really, it's going to end up being Steve and Diana.
Oh my gosh. You won't believe this. I just noticed this because I have the video playing right in front of me. I noticed a tiny, tiny little filming error.
Oh, really?
She sets her glass down twice.
Huh.
There's a wide shot from far away where Steve is talking to her. She sets the glass down. And then when he asks her to dance, in that scene you can see she's holding the glass again. She sets it down again.
I had never caught that. Yeah, those little continuity errors.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's continuity error. Those are just, those don't bother me. I just think they're fun.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to catch them.
Yeah, no, the drink thing with Diana just sort of reminded me of a tiny detail from Batman v Superman, which was this sort of a continuous thing where lots of characters didn't drink things that were offered to them. I don't think it's really the same thematic context here.
Yeah.
But in BVS, it was because I guess it was symbolic of them not taking other people's blood or something.
Yeah, that's right. I think Man of Steel Answers covered that as like, if people are trying to lie and if you're eating it up, then you actually drink it. If you reject the lie and you see through it, then you like decline the drink.
And so I know Diana did that a few times in that movie. I don't know if it's the same context here. It's probably just a coincidence, but it makes me think of that.
Yeah. And I should mention too, like at the start, Steve is really all thinking about their next steps. Like, hey, we got to plan for this. We really don't have time to celebrate. We got to get stuff ready for the next phase. And gradually he kind of relinquishes that and settles into the celebration a little bit more. So it's interesting. Like to me, a lot of this scene is kind of like breaking through the protective barriers of Steve. So one way that he kind of like closes himself off is by staying very busy in his mission and that kind of thing. And then another way he protects himself or closes off is like by humor or kind of by being sarcastic sort of.
Right.
But gradually those layers all come off. And so by the end of the scene, he's like more revealed and intimate with Diana.
Right. And, it's all Diana's doing. That the thing is, she may not understand this world the way that Steve does, but she's a major influence on him with her optimism and, kind of shiny outlook on the world.
Yeah. And speaking of all Diana's doing, so Steve says, you did this, trying to really give her credit. But Diana just kind of smiles at him and says, no, we did it, or we did. So I think that's a really charming part of her character, that she doesn't try to take credit. She shares credit. And to me, that's just a really nice trait for anybody to have, is that they're very generous with giving credit to others. So I'm a man, but I feel like sometimes women, generally speaking, are a little bit better at sharing credit, and sometimes men are like a little bit more likely to kind of take the credit themselves. And I know it's actually not just me, because there have been psychological studies that when men have something go well, they're more likely to kind of ascribe themselves as the reason that it went well. And women are more likely to say like, well, there were a lot of things that went into that, a lot of contributors or whatever.
Yeah.
So there actually is a little bit of a gender difference there in terms of like taking credit versus sharing credit.
There is. And I think there would be some people who would argue that she should have just accepted the compliment because, I think in society, most of the time women are expected to, like, if you take too much credit for yourself, it's seen as bragging. It's not really seen the same way for men. But obviously the way that Diana was raised, that never occurs to her. They're much more egalitarian. They would definitely praise each other for their accomplishments, and they share everything. So from her angle, that's just the natural thing to do, and men should do it too.
Yeah. They shift now towards the dancing, and Steve, you see the village people dancing in the background and stuff. And so Steve says you have dancing on Paradise Island. And I thought that was a nice way to also slip in the name Paradise Island, where he's kind of just using it as a way to refer to like, that paradise where you came from.
Yeah, it's a good reference, even though he's actually being sarcastic.
Yeah, that's a nice way to do it. And Diana says, we do have dancing, but what these people are just swaying. So it's she's kind of, playfully teasing his culture versus her culture. And so this gets us back into, like I was saying, part of the chemistry between the two is this, cultural differences. And I'm learning about your culture, you're learning about mine. We're kind of having a little bit of a, competition, but it's like a friendly competition.
Right.
Well, sometimes it's not so friendly, like men are doing horrible things. But in other times like this, it's more like oh yeah, we have a word for this, or yes, we do dancing. It's a little bit different though.
Yeah, but they're laughing about it here. It's not so much
Yeah,
strange
this is
culture
very playful.
shock. It's they're very comfortable with each other now.
Yeah, and then Steve is gonna also kind of make it playful, where he's like, all right, I better show you how it's done. So that little banter. It's like well written, it's well acted. It makes it easy to kind of like these characters and like them together.
hmm And when he asks her to dance, I kind of noticed that there's a shot where they're still sitting on the fountain, and in the background you can very clearly see the tank that Diana flipped earlier.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so it seems like it's very deliberately there, and Steve makes a big show about removing his gun and setting it down before he takes her hand. So it kind of tells you that even though this is a very quiet and tender moment, there's still the horrors of war looming in the background. This is just a temporary reprieve, which is sad to think about, but it's definitely you're very aware that this is just a little bit of moment of rest before they have to get back to the dirty work again.
Right. Yeah, there's kind of this clock ticking down because, they saved Veld, but they haven't made much more progress towards actually finding Ares and stopping the war, like that sort of thing. So as an audience, this is making us smile and it's kind of nice, but we know the danger is still there. The bigger threat has not been addressed yet, so they're obviously going to have to keep going into more danger and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. It also does, the scene serves a functional purpose in that it kind of does show Diana and I guess Steve, even he's realizing that there are, lovely things in this world, magical things, like when she sees the snow, things that kind of remind you that the war is worth fighting.
Yeah, and I also like those moments, like when Diana sees the snow and she just genuinely is smiling and she says it's magical.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve actually says, oh, it is, isn't it? Like, so she's helping Steve to remember that there's beauty in the world and that there is something worth saving.
Yeah.
And so I like seeing his reaction to Diana. I've mentioned that in other episodes, but it's a big one here with that snow falling.
Right. So she helps him see the magic and the mundane.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we get to that, though, I did want to mention with Charlie. So, they have their banter and they're, saying, be polite. We're going to learn how to dance. And they have the nice thing where she says, you're awfully close. And he's like, that's the whole point or whatever, so that's kind of nice back and forth. But they hear Charlie singing. And so this is, a part where we're pushing Charlie's little character development forward a little bit. So he didn't really come through with the sniper in the last scene. But now he's celebrating, we hear him singing, and so you're thinking like, oh, like maybe he would thrive more outside of the war, than he's not thriving in the war.
Mm-hmm.
But he sings this song, I Look Into Your Eyes and Hold Your Hand, and I thought that's kind of cute because Diana and Steve have actually just like kind of embraced each other, and so Charlie's singing is almost like narrating what Steve and Diana are doing, so I thought that's kind of just cute.
Exactly. And I mean, just like Steve here, it's a moment where, Charlie's being taken away from the horrors of war for a moment. And, he's also reconnecting with, the beautiful things in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Steve marks that by saying, I haven't heard him sing in years. So, yeah, it is this kind of maybe starting to pull out of the horrors.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will say that there's a little bit of an anachronism here, or error in the filmmaking, because he's singing a song, if I'm not mistaken, it's called I'll Walk Beside You. That's by Edward Lockton, who I thought would probably be Scottish or British or something, but he's actually an American songwriter. But this song, I'll Walk Beside You, was very popular in Britain, but that was in World War II.
Ah.
And the song was actually written in 1939. So there's no way that Charlie was singing it, 20 years earlier, unless Charlie wrote it first and then Edward Lockton plagiarized it from him or something.
Okay, because my initial theory was that Charlie is a time traveler.
Oh, or that.
But let me see. That I guess that qualifies as one of those things that's like technically an error, but they probably just thought that the song felt nice for the moment.
Exactly. I think they found that the song works so well. They're like, just use it anyway, and who the heck's gonna notice?
No one will know.
Yeah. And to me, it doesn't actually take anything away from the scene. It's just like a silly little mistake if you want to be technical about it.
Right, like the setting the glass down twice. This stuff happens in filmmaking.
Yeah, but the bigger thing is just really great to see. We saw Charlie getting beat up. We saw him having his struggles, at night with the PTSD and stuff. We saw him having struggles in the battle. But now we see him like, hey, look at Charlie. Like, isn't this nice to see him more at ease and doing something that he enjoys? And then Diana, to her credit, she notices it, she picks up on it, and she like helps Charlie continue, like with some really nice moments later where Diana kind of
right,
calls that music out from Charlie.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where this is, like they mentioned, it was a team effort, but in a way, this is a lot of Diana's influence. Like a lot of this was possible because she made it happen.
Yeah. So we get to the Snowfall, which we already started to mention. I really like Steve's reaction to Diana's innocence to it. But then Alessandro made a nice point where we're kind of thinking about naivete or inexperience, or just inexperience in the sense of something in the world that I have not experienced before. And for Diana, it's this snowfall. She's like, wow, this is beautiful. It's magical. She's like seeing it for the first time. And then as they talk, and she asks Steve about, what do people do? Is this what they do when they're not fighting a war? And he's like, I'm not quite sure what they do. Maybe they get married, they go to work, they have children, they grow old. But then Steve says, like, I don't actually know. Like, he says, I have no idea about this stuff, actually. So Alessandro made the nice point that those are Steve's snowfalls. Like, he does not actually know what it's like to be married or have children or grow old with somebody. And if that were to happen, that would be like his first time ever seeing the beautiful snow like fall in front of him.
Exactly. So, I mean, he's been so cynical because he's grown up in a cynical world. And so this moment here with Diana is just as magical to him as I'm sure the snowfall is for her.
And so we want to also break open that little exchange between Diana and Steve. So
it's a great exchange.
Glossed over it kind of fast, but yeah, she says, is this what people do? All of this joy, right? The joy in this village and the music and the snowfall and smiles and dancing. Is this what people do when there are no wars to fight? And so this is also Diana like imagining, if I can defeat Ares, I could bring this to the whole world, right? Like I could defeat war. She's kind of thinking like in that grandiose way. But then is this what people would do? So she's also trying to learn about man's world. So it's a really nice way to approach this, interaction.
But then, like you said, Steve kind of responds. It turns out that he was responding sort of half seriously, but he's mostly telling it as a joke. Like, he kind of rolls his eyes a bit when he mentions breakfast and reading the paper and all of that.
Yep.
So he's initially trying to deflect. In the end, when he says, he doesn't know, it's like, well, there's another layer to that now. I mean, he was kind of joking, but he was also just kind of making it up.
Yeah, he's
like, he didn't know. He's trying to imagine what is like a storybook version of a happy ending.
Exactly. Yep. He's using that humor and stuff to protect himself from really exposing something like inner, like something very personal about him.
Exactly.
But she kind of probes further and she says, like, what's it like? And that's when he has to reveal, like, I don't really know. So yeah, that whole thing has actually been, his like best guess at like what people might do. But he has been in this war. He has been, kind of alone. He's got his friends and people that he has gone to battle with, but he's not had that personal connection of a family, of growing old with somebody, having children like that. So yeah, it's all just him imagining the fairy tale ending. And also to bring up Man of Steel Answers again, like Doc talks about this whole movie as actually kind of like in the genre of a fairy tale. And so for him, he's like, yep, I guess it's happily ever after is what happens after the war is done, maybe.
And, the sad thing, spoiler alert, he's never really going to know, but I think this is the moment where he realizes the possibility of happy ending. And, in the end, he realizes that it could still be true for Diana. She could, he might have to sacrifice himself, but she can bring about this better world, possibly someday.
So you mentioned him dying at the end, and I think this was on purpose, like as a foreshadowing, because the last thing he says is grow old.
Oh.
And then he says, I have no idea. So like, I think that was on purpose, that they're like saying, we're going to, in retrospect, you'll realize that he's never going to get to grow old.
It's just a fairy tale.
Yeah. So yeah, it's really well acted. It's good writing. I really enjoy that, and I like the layers of the two people connecting. Right, like they're not only dancing together, which like on the surface, like oh they're dancing together, so that's bringing them closer. It's like yeah they're dancing together, but really they're starting to open up, and especially here Steve, who has not opened up very much yet. He is now really kind of opening up about his loneliness and maybe some of the dreams that he has, but he's not sure how they're really going to happen. So
Hmm.
I think it's just a really good way to push that relationship forward. And one of our listeners, Wayne Buck, who listens on YouTube and comments with us, sometimes we enjoy interacting with him, especially about Wonder Woman. He especially said he liked the acting, like the way that that Gal Gadot and Chris Pine performed this scene, and just
They have
the
such great chemistry.
exactly, and the even just on their face and their body language, like when they avert their eyes versus when they kind of like look at each other, it's really well acted, and Wayne brings up those points really well. And he also noticed, like we did, where Steve is kind of dodging the question at first, but then he does kind of open up a little bit later on.
Hmm.
So, and Wayne also connected it back to the boat conversation because Steve says, "I have no idea what all that stuff is like," and that's the same thing that he said earlier about like why do people get married if they don't stay together, and Steve's also like I have no idea why they get married.
Hmm.
So there's a nice little echo there in the
Yeah.
dialogue.
Yeah, he was just sort of flippant about it, but but it's really emotionally landing this time around.
Yeah, yeah. So anything else about this kind of dialogue that they have while they're dancing? I think that was kind of my main thoughts on it.
Yeah, that was about it. The whole thing is just very sweet, and I always enjoy it. It's very very loving and honest.
Yeah, and to me, it's why I think for me the next part works really well. The fact that they're
Hmm.
going to spend the night together, I think it works really well because they've not only gone through danger together and they've kind of like worked as partners in a very stressful situation, but they've also kind of opened up with each other a little bit. They've had their chemistry, but they've also had a little bit more intimacy just in getting to know each other, and especially Diana getting to see a little bit of Steve's inner soul, so to speak.
Hmm.
And so to me, I'm like, okay, I'm really glad that they did that development before the night together, because then to me it makes it makes a lot more sense that they would do that
Right.
at the end of
It's
the
a
night.
especially because by the time of this scene, it's a connection that has literally been forged in battle.
Hmm.
So it's, I think everybody in this scene, like all these village people, like I said, they're dancing in front of that tank.
Hmm. Hmm.
This is the courtyard where just earlier this same day, I think, people were shooting at them. This whole battle was going on. It was, I'm sure, terrifying and chaotic. And all these people here are, they're dancing. They're trying to hold on to these moments while they can.
Hmm.
Uh, so I'm sure that leads to the not so much urgency, but you're right, they've already formed this connection. So wanting to spend the night together, it feels like yeah we should seize this opportunity while we can,
Hmm.
which is very sweet.
I totally agree. To transition up to the bedroom, Patty Jenkins goes back to a wide shot so we can see the snowflakes, which I think is just a really nice way to use the snowflakes, which have now been infused with meaning because of
Hmm.
the way they were talking about them.
Right.
And I really connect the snowflakes with the idea of magical, so that's why we call this the magical night scene. But then we cut to, Steve coming into the room and like kind of like letting Diana know like, okay, here's your room that you can stay in. But I don't think there's any dialogue here, right? Like it's all just looks, and then it's just them kind of getting a read of each other. Steve
Hmm.
is about to leave, but then Diana looks at him, and her look seems to kind of communicate the sort of you could stay if you wanted, and then
Yeah, it's
Steve
come
closed the
hither.
door. Yeah. So she doesn't explicitly say here, but she could stop him at any moment. So like for me, I have kind of you know in the era of Me Too movement and stuff, you want to get explicit consent before you would do anything like this. But to me, she gives consent, and she could have stopped him at any time if she ever wanted to.
Hmm.
So I think the consent to me is pretty clear in this moment, and really she's almost in the leadership role in terms of kind of making it happen. Even though Steve is the one that closes the door and comes over, it seems to me pretty clear that she was basically gave him the first signal that she wanted this to happen.
Oh, indeed. Yeah, I mean, there's no actual dialogue here because, it's just the music and the warm colors. So, it's it's sort of artsy. And any dialogue would just be somewhat frivolous here.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, you want to follow general guidelines in real life and, be as explicit as you can. But for the sake of this scene, it's clear what everybody wants. And yeah, it's like you said, Diana was actually the one who makes the first move here. Steve was going to leave. He was going to be a perfect gentleman. And this scene, even just like the one that preceded it, and I guess like the entire movie, it's the return of those very, warm colors. Like, even their skin in the firelight seems like, gold and glowing. And it's just, I don't know, the feel of it. And I know I've said this in all my previous appearances, but it's very much like a painting. I think it's got that feel of early, late 1800s, early 1900s work of art you might see in a museum with the way the colors are balanced.
Yeah, and I agree. It's very artfully done, tastefully done. The fact that there's a lot of shadow and darkness, it makes the firelight glow look really pretty. But also, to me, it's very tasteful, private kind of way to set this scene by having a lot of the shadow, right? Like, so that we're kind of giving them their privacy of having this together. And, they put their hand on each other's face and then they start to kiss. And then pretty quickly we cut to outside because we're just like, all right, we're going to give them their space. And to me, it's like a very elegant way that Patty Jenkins approached this love scene.
Right. It's like more of a commitment to the romance story rather than, like we said, in a lot of action movies, there's like a romance subplot that's usually just kind of stuck in there so that they can have something explicit like a sex scene or something, like that's supposed to be a major draw. But here, yeah, they decided we're just going to be really tasteful. The emotion of the moment is important, but we don't actually have to see anything. So, yeah, and then, cuts to some more snowfall, that magical snowfall.
Yeah, I thought that was a really nice way to end it. Like the one light is on, so we know it draws our eye there, but then it has the snowfall in the foreground, kind of coming down. So it is a magical night together. And rather than having them disrobe or something like that, trying to show some more skin or whatever, they let the music just emphasize the emotion. And again, I think Gregson Williams did a nice job because he wrote this kind of love theme between Diane and Steve, the da 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 da, and he has that swell here, and to me it's just really effective. So I would rather have a very tastefully shot moment of the emotion and then the music enhancing the emotion. I would rather have that. It works to me so much better than trying to make it like more sultry or something like that.
Yeah, that would be kind of cheesy, I think. Yeah. But gosh, I'm thinking of that beautiful shot immediately before this, like the very last shot of them dancing in front of the cafe, and once again, when you look at it, it's this wide shot. You can see them dancing on the ground there, and you can see the snow falling, but there's still that tank to the left of the screen very deliberately in the shot, and it just kind of reminds you that this is all temporary. They're gonna have to get back to the fighting soon, and it's heartbreaking after you've seen the movie once and you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, that just adds another emotion to it. Like, it's already very emotionally rich, but then upon repeat viewing, it's like, oh, it's even more. Yeah. But I think that will do it for our analysis of scene 35, a very beautiful scene in more ways than one. But we will continue forward with some Wonder Woman analysis later, and if you need some DCEU content in the meantime, there's always the Suicide Squad cast and Man of Steel Answers.